Greetings from Exam Heist. We have identified important exam questions. Practice these important questions 2-3 times to get 100% success in exam. Subscribe and comment, share PDF in the below comment section to get PDF of these 40 important questions. If you want to access full dump, please visit www.examheist.com. We have 24/7 support available for your doubts and exam queries.
Question 1. A gaming website gives users the ability to trade game items with each other on the platform. The platform requires both users' records to be updated and persisted in one transaction. If any update fails, the transaction must roll back. Which AWS solution can provide the transactional capability that is required for this feature? Option A. Amazon DynamoDB with operations made with the consistent read parameter set to true. Option B. Amazon Elasticache for Memcached with operations made within a transaction block. Option C. Amazon DynamoDB with reads and writes made by using transact operations. Option D. Amazon Aurora MySQL with operations made within a transaction block. Option A. Amazon Athena with operations made within a transaction block. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option C. Amazon DynamoDB with reads and writes made by using transact operations. Question 2. A developer has created a Java application that makes HTTP requests directly to AWS services. Application logging shows 5xx HTTP response codes that occur at irregular intervals. The errors are affecting users. How should the developer update the application to improve the application's resiliency? Option A. Revise the request content in the application code. Option B. Use the AWS SDK for Java to interact with AWS APIs. Option C. Scale out the application so that more instances of the application are running. Option D. Add additional logging to the application code. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option B. Use the AWS SDK for Java to interact with AWS APIs. Question 3. A global company has a mobile app with static data stored in an Amazon S3 bucket in the US EAST1 region. The company serves the content through an Amazon CloudFront distribution. The company is launching the mobile app in South Africa. The data must reside in the SOUTH1 region. The company does not want to deploy a specific mobile client for South Africa. What should the company do to meet these requirements? Option A. Use the CloudFront geographic restriction feature to block access to users in South Africa. Option B. Create a email protected function. Associate A. Email protected function is an origin request trigger with the CloudFront distribution to change the S3 origin region. Option C. Create a email protected function. Associate A. Email protected function is a viewer response trigger with the CloudFront distribution to change the S3 origin region. Option D. Include of SOUTH1 in the alternate domain name CNAME of the CloudFront distribution. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option B. Create a email protected function. Associate A. Email protected function is an origin request trigger with the CloudFront distribution to change the S3 origin region. Question 4. A developer is testing an AWS Lambda function by using the AWS Serverless Application Model. AWS SAM, local CLI. The application that is implemented by the Lambda function makes several AWS API calls by using the AWS Software Development Kit SDK. The developer wants to allow the function to make AWS API calls in a test AWS account from the developer's laptop. What should the developer do to meet these requirements? Option A. Edit the template YML file. Add the AWS ACCESSKEYID property in the AWS SECRETACCESSKEY property in the global section. Option B. Add a test profile by using the AWS configure command with the profile option. Run AWS SAM by using the SAM local invoke command with the profile option. Option C. Edit the template YML tile for the AWS serverless function resource. Set the role to an ing role in the AWS account. Option D. Run the function by using the SAM local invoke command. Override the AWS ACCESSKEYID parameter and the AWS SECRETACCESSKEY parameter by specifying the parameter overrides option. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Add a test profile by using the AWS configure command with the profile option. Run AWS SAM by using the SAM local invoke command with the profile option. Question 5. A developer designed an application on an Amazon EC2 instance. The application makes API requests to objects in an Amazon S3 bucket. Which combination of steps will ensure that the application makes the API requests in the most secure manner? Choose 2. Option A. Create an ing user that has permissions to the S3 bucket. Add the user to an ing group. Option B. Create an ing role that has permissions to the S3 bucket. Option C. Add the ing role to an instance profile. Attach the instance profile to the EC2 instance. Option D. Create an ing role that has permissions to the S3 bucket. Assign the role to an 1AM group. Option A. Store the credentials of the ing user in the environment variables on the EC2 instance. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Create an ing role that has permissions to the S3 bucket. Option C. Add the ing role to an instance profile. Attach the instance profile to the EC2 instance. Question 6. A developer is configuring an Amazon CloudFront distribution for a new application to provide encryption in transit. The application is running in the EUWEST1 region. The developer creates a new certificate in AWS Certificate Manager ACM in UWEST1. But the certificate is not visible in the CloudFront distribution settings. What should the developer do to fix this problem? Option A. Create the certificate for the domain in the same region as the application. Ensure that the alternate domain name CNAME in the distribution settings matches the domain name in the certificate. Option B. Create the certificate in the EUWEST1 region. Ensure that the alternate domain name CNAME in the distribution settings matches the domain name in the certificate. Option C. Recreate the CloudFront distribution in the same region as the certificate. Option D. Specify the ACM certificate name as the default root object of the CloudFront distribution. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Create the certificate in the EUWEST1 region. Ensure that the alternate domain name CNAME in the distribution settings matches the domain name in the certificate. Question 7. A developer is building an application that runs behind an application load balancer ALB. The ALB is configured as the origin for an Amazon CloudFront distribution. Users will log into the application by using their social media accounts. How can the developer authenticate users? Option A. Validate the users by inspecting the tokens in an AWS Lambda authorizer on the ALB. Option B. Configure the ALB to use Amazon Cognito as one of the authentication providers. Option C. Configure CloudFront to use Amazon Cognito as one of the authentication providers. Option D. Validate the users by calling the Amazon Cognito API in an AWS Lambda authorizer on the ALB. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option B. Configure the ALB to use Amazon Cognito as one of the authentication providers. Question 8. A company has an application that analyzes photographs. A developer is preparing the application for deployment to Amazon EC2 instances. The application's image analysis functions require a mix of GPU instances and CPU instances that run on Amazon Linux. The developer needs to add code to the application so that the functions can determine whether they are running on a GPU instance. What should the functions do to obtain this information? Option A. Call the describe instances API operation and filter on the current instance ID. Examine the elastic GPU associations property. Option B. Evaluate the GPU available environment variable. Option C. Call the describe elastic GPUs API operation. Option D. Retrieve the instance type from the instance metadata. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option D. Retrieve the instance type from the instance metadata. Question 9. A company has an application that uses Amazon Cognito user pools as an identity provider. The company must secure access to user records. The company has set up multi-factor authentication (MFA). The company also wants to send a login activity notification by email every time a user logs in. What is the most operationally efficient solution that meets this requirement? Option A. Create an AWS Lambda function that uses Amazon Simple Email Service. Amazon says, to send the email notification, add an Amazon API Gateway API to invoke the function. Call the API from the client side when login confirmation is received. Option B. Create an AWS Lambda function that uses Amazon Simple Email Service. Amazon says, to send the email notification, add an Amazon Cognito Post Authentication Lambda trigger for the function. Option C. Create an AWS Lambda function that uses Amazon Simple Email Service. Amazon says, to send the email notification, create an Amazon CloudWatch Logs log subscription filter to invoke the function based on the login status. Option D. Configure Amazon Cognito to stream all logs to Amazon Kinesis data firehose. Create an AWS Lambda function to process the streamed logs and to send the email notification based on the login status of each user. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option B. Create an AWS Lambda function that uses Amazon Simple Email Service. Amazon says, to send the email notification, add an Amazon Cognito Post Authentication Lambda trigger for the function. Question 10. A company hosts a 3-tier web application on AWS behind an Amazon CloudFront distribution. A developer wants a dashboard to monitor error rates and anomalies of the CloudFront distribution with the shortest possible refresh interval. Which combination of slops should the developer take to meet these requirements? Choose 2. Option A. Activate real-time logs on the CloudFront distribution. Create a stream in Amazon Kinesis data streams. Option B. Export the CloudFront logs to an Amazon S3 bucket. Detect anomalies and error rates with Amazon QuickSight. Option C. Configure Amazon Kinesis data streams to deliver logs to Amazon OpenSearch Service. Amazon Elasticsearch Service. Create a dashboard in OpenSearch Dashboards. Kibana. Option D. Create Amazon CloudWatch alarms based on expected values of selected CloudWatch metrics to detect anomalies and errors. Option A. Design an Amazon CloudWatch dashboard of the selected CloudFront distribution metrics. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option A. Activate real-time logs on the CloudFront distribution. Create a stream in Amazon Kinesis data streams. Option C. Configure Amazon Kinesis data streams to deliver logs to Amazon OpenSearch Service. Amazon Elasticsearch Service. Create a dashboard in OpenSearch Dashboards. Kibana. Question 11. A developer creates a customer-managed key for multiple AWS users to encrypt data in Amazon S3. The developer configures Amazon Simple Notification Service, Amazon SNS, to publish a message if key deletion is scheduled. The developer needs to preserve any SNS messages that cannot be delivered so that those messages can be reprocessed. Which AWS service or feature should the developer use to meet this requirement? Option A. Amazon Simple Email Service. Amazon says. Option B. AWS Lambda. Option C. Amazon Simple Queue Service. Amazon SQS. Option D. Amazon CloudWatch Alarm. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option C. Amazon Simple Queue Service, Amazon SQS. Question 12. A developer needs to deploy an application to AWS Elastic Beanstalk for a company. The application consists of a single Docker image. The company's automated continuous integration and continuous delivery CI/CD process builds the Docker image and pushes the image to a public Docker registry. How should the developer deploy the application to Elastic Beanstalk? Option A. Create a Docker file. Configure Elastic Beanstalk to build the application as a Docker image. Option B. Create a Docker Compose YML file. Use the Elastic Beanstalk CLI to deploy the application. Option C. Create a zip file that contains the Docker image. Upload the zip file to Elastic Beanstalk. Option D. Create a Docker file. Run the Elastic Beanstalk CLI eb local run command in the same directory. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option A. Create a Docker file. Configure Elastic Beanstalk to build the application as a Docker image. Question 13. A company is using AWS Code Deploy for all production deployments. A developer has an Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS, application that uses the Code Deploy default, ECS AIIATONCE configuration. The developer needs to update the production environment in increments of 10% until the entire production environment is updated. Which code deploy configuration should the developer use to meet these requirements? Option A. Code deploy default. ECS Canary 10% 5 minutes. Option B. Code deploy default. ECS Linear 10% every 3 minutes. Option C. Code deploy default. 1 at a time. Option D. Code deploy default. Lambda Canary 10% 5 minutes. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option B. Code deploy default. ECS Linear 10% every 3 minutes. Question 14. A company is using AWS Elastic Beanstalk to deploy a 3-tier application. The application uses an Amazon RDS DB instance as the database tier. The company wants to decouple the DB instance from the Elastic Beanstalk environment. Which combination of steps should a developer take to meet this requirement? Choose 2. Option A. Create a new Elastic Beanstalk environment that connects to the DB instance. Option B. Create a new DB instance from a snapshot of the previous DB instance. Option C. Use the elastic beanstalk key to decouple the DB instance. Option D. Use the AWS key to decouple the DB instance. Option A. Modify the current elastic beanstalk environment to connect to the DB instance. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option A. Create a new elastic beanstalk environment that connects to the DB instance. Option B. Create a new DB instance from a snapshot of the previous DB instance. Question 15. A company has point-of-sale devices across thousands of retail shops that synchronize sales transactions with a centralized system. The system includes an Amazon API Gateway API that exposes an AWS Lambda function. The Lambda function processes the transactions and stores the transactions in Amazon RDS for MySQL. The number of transactions increases rapidly during the day and is near zero at night. How can a developer increase the elasticity of the system most cost-effectively? Option A. Migrate from Amazon RDS to Amazon Aurora MySQL. Use an Aurora auto-scaling policy to scale ROD replicas based on CPU consumption. Option B. Migrate from Amazon RDS to Amazon Aurora MySQL. Use an Aurora auto-scaling policy to scale read replicas based on the number of database connections. Option C. Create an Amazon Simple Queue service. Amazon SQS queue. Publish transactions to the queue. Set the queue to invoke the Lambda function. Turn on enhanced fanout for the Lambda function. Option D. Create an Amazon Simple Queue service. Amazon SQS queue. Publish transactions to the queue. Set the queue to invoke the Lambda function. Set the reserved concurrency of the Lambda function to be less than the number of database connections. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option D. Create an Amazon Simple Queue service. Amazon SQS queue. Publish transactions to the queue. Set the queue to invoke the Lambda function. Set the reserved concurrency of the Lambda function to be less than the number of database connections. Question 16. A developer is writing an AWS Lambda function. The Lambda function needs to access items that are stored in an Amazon DynamoDB table. What is the most secure way to configure this access for the Lambda function? Option A. Create an in-user that has permissions to access the DynamoDB table. Create an access key for this user. Store the access key ID and secret access key in the Lambda function environment variables. Option B. Add a resource-based policy to the DynamoDB table to allow access from the Lambda function's ing role. Option C. Create an ing policy that allows access to the DynamoDB table. Attach this policy to the Lambda function's ing role. Option D. Create a DynamoDB accelerator DAX cluster. Configure the Lambda function to use the DAX duster to access the DynamoDB table. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option C. Create an ing policy that allows access to the DynamoDB table. Attach this policy to the Lambda function's ing role. Question 17. A developer is implementing user authentication and authorization for a web application that is hosted on an Amazon EC2 instance. The developer needs to ensure that the user credentials are encrypted and secure when they are stored and transmitted. Which solution will meet these requirements? Option A. Activate web server modules for authentication and authorization on the instance. Use HTTP basic authentication for the user login. Option B. Deploy a custom authentication and authorization API over HTTP. Store the user credentials on Amazon Elasticache for Redis. Option C. Use Amazon Cognito to configure a user pool. Use the Amazon Cognito API to authenticate and authorize the users. Option D. Create ing users. Assign the users to different ing groups. Use AWS single sign-on to authenticate and authorize each user. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option C. Use Amazon Cognito to configure a user pool. Use the Amazon Cognito API to authenticate and authorize the users. Question 18. A company that has multiple offices uses an Amazon DynamoDB table to store employee payroll information. Item attributes consist of employee names, office identifiers, and cumulative daily hours worked. The most frequently used query extracts a report of an alphabetical subset of employees for a specific office. Which design of the DynamoDB table primary key will have the minimum performance impact? Option A. Partition key on the office identifier and sort key on the employee name. Option B. Partition key on the employee name and sort key on the office identifier. Option C. Partition key on the employee name. Option D. Partition key on the office identifier. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. Partition key on the office identifier and sort key on the employee name. Question 19. A company hosts a microservices application that uses Amazon API Gateway, AWS Lambda, Amazon Simple Queue Service, Amazon SQS, and Amazon DynamoDB. One of the Lambda functions adds messages to an SQS FIFO queue. When a developer checks the application logs, the developer finds a few duplicated items in a DynamoDB table. The items were inserted by another polling function that processes messages from the queue. What is the most likely cause of this issue? Option A. Write operations on the DynamoDB table are being throttled. Option B. The SQS queue delivered the message to the function more than once. Option C. API Gateway duplicated the message in the SQS queue. Option D. The polling function timeout is greater than the queue visibility timeout. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. The polling function timeout is greater than the queue visibility timeout. Question 20. A development team has been using a builder server that is hosted on an Amazon EC2 instance to perform builds and deployments for the last 3 months. The EC2 instance's instance profile uses an ing role that contains the administrator access managed policy. The development team must replace that policy with a policy that provides only the required permissions. What is the fastest way to create a custom 1 AM policy for the EC2 instance to meet this requirement? Option A. Create a new ing policy based on services that the build server deployed or updated in the last 3 months. Option B. Create a new ing policy that includes all actions that AWS CloudTrail recorded for the ing role in the last 3 months. Option C. Create a new permissions boundary policy that denies all access. Associate the permissions boundaries with the ing role. Option D. Create a new ing policy by using Amazon Athena to query an Amazon S3 bucket that contains AWS CloudTrail events that the ing role performed in the last 3 months. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Create a new ing policy that includes all actions that AWS CloudTrail recorded for the ing role in the last 3 months. Question 21. A developer needs to write an AWS CloudFormation template on a local machine and deploy a CloudFormation stack to AWS. What must the developer do to complete these tasks? Option A. Install the AWS CLI. Configure the AWS CLI by using an ing username and password. Option B. Install the AWS CLI. Configure the AWS CLI by using an SSH key. Option C. Install the AWS CLI. Configure the AWS CLI by using an ing user access key and secret key. Option D. Install an AWS Software Development Kit. SDK. Configure the SDK by using an X509 certificate. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option C. Install the AWS CLI. Configure the AWS CLI by using an in-user access key in secret key. Question 22. A developer is working on a web application that runs on Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS, and uses an Amazon DynamoDB table to store data. The application performs a large number of read requests against a small set of the table data. How can the developer improve the performance of these requests? Choose 2. Option A. Create an Amazon Elastic Cache cluster. Configure the application to cache data in the cluster. Option B. Create a DynamoDB accelerator. DAX cluster. Configure the application to use the DAX cluster for DynamoDB requests. Option C. Configure the application to make strongly consistent read requests against the DynamoDB table. Option D. Increase the read capacity of the DynamoDB table. Option A. Enable DynamoDB adaptive capacity. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Create a DynamoDB accelerator. DAX cluster. Configure the application to use the DAX cluster for DynamoDB requests. Question 23. A developer needs to use Amazon DynamoDB to store customer orders. The developer's company requires all customer data to be encrypted at rest with a key that the company generates. What should the developer do to meet these requirements? Option A. Create the DynamoDB table with encryption set to none. Code the application to use the key to decrypt the data when the application reads from the table. Code the application to use the key to encrypt the data when the application writes to the table. Option B. Store the key by using AWS Key Management Service. AWS KMS. Choose an AWS KMS customer managed key during creation of the DynamoDB table. Provide the Amazon resource name AN of the AWS KMS key. Option C. Store the key by using AWS Key Management Service. AWS KMS. Create the DynamoDB table with default encryption. Include the KMS encrypt parameter with the Amazon resource name AN of the AWS KMS key when using the DynamoDB Software Development Kit. SDK. Option D. Store the key by using AWS Key Management Service. AWS KMS. Choose an AWS KMS AWS managed key during creation of the DynamoDB table. Provide the Amazon resource name AN of the AWS KMS key. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Store the key by using AWS Key Management Service. AWS KMS. Choose an AWS KMS customer managed key during creation of the DynamoDB table. Provide the Amazon resource name AN of the AWS KMS key. Question 24. A developer is creating a solution to track an account's Amazon S3 buckets over time. The developer has created an AWS Lambda function that will run on a schedule. The function will list the account's S3 buckets and will store the list in an Amazon DynamoDB table. The developer receives a permissions error when the developer runs the function with the AWS Lambda Basic Execution Role AWS Managed Policy. Which combination of permissions should the developer use to resolve this error? Choose 2. Option A. Cross-account ing role. Option B. Permission for the Lambda function to list buckets in Amazon S3. Option C. Permission for the Lambda function to write in DynamoDB. Option D. Permission for Amazon S3 to invoke the Lambda function. Option A. Permission for DynamoDB to invoke the Lambda function. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Permission for the Lambda function to list buckets in Amazon S3. Option C. Permission for the Lambda function to write in DynamoDB. Question 25. A company is adding items to an Amazon DynamoDB table from an AWS Lambda function that is written in Python. A developer needs to implement a solution that inserts records in the DynamoDB table and performs automatic retry when the insert fails. Which solution meets these requirements with minimum code changes? Option A. Configure the Python code to run the AWS CLI through shell to call the put item operation. Option B. Call the put item operation from Python by using the DynamoDB HTTP API. Option C. Queue the items in AWS Glue, which will put them into the DynamoDB table. Option D. Use the AWS Software Development Kit (SDK) for Python, Boto 3, to call the put item operation. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. Use the AWS Software Development Kit (SDK) for Python, Boto 3, to call the put item operation. Question 26. A developer is writing an AWS Lambda function. The developer wants to log key events that occur during the Lambda function and include a unique identifier to associate the events with a specific function. Invocation. Which of the following will help the developer accomplish this objective? Option A. Obtain the request identifier from the Lambda context object. Architect the application to write logs to the console. Option B. Obtain the request identifier from the Lambda event object. Architect the application to write logs to a file. Option C. Obtain the request identifier from the Lambda event object. Architect the application to write logs to the console. Option D. Obtain the request identifier from the Lambda context object. Architect the application to write logs to a file. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. Obtain the request identifier from the Lambda context object. Architect the application to write logs to a file. Question 27. A company experienced partial downtime during the last deployment of a new application. AWS Elastic Beanstalk split the environment's Amazon EC2 instances into batches and deployed a new version one batch at a time after taking them out of service. Therefore, full capacity was not maintained during deployment. The developer plans to release a new version of the application and is looking for a policy that will maintain full capacity and minimize the impact of the failed deployment. Which deployment policy should the developer use? Option A. Immutable. Option B. All at once. Option C. Rolling. Option D. Rolling with an additional batch. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. Immutable. Question 28. A company is providing services to many downstream consumers. Each consumer may connect to one or more services. This has resulted in a complex architecture that is difficult to manage and does not scale well. The company needs a single interface to manage these services to consumers. Which AWS service should be used to refactor this architecture? Option A. AWS Lambda. Option B. AWS X-Ray. Option C. Amazon SQS. Option D. Amazon API Gateway. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. Amazon API Gateway. Question 29. When a developer tries to run an AWS code build project, it raises an error because the length of all environment variables exceeds the limit for the combined maximum of characters. What is the recommended solution? Option A. Add the export LCALL equals n_us. UTF-8 command to the pre_build section to ensure POSIX localization. Option B. Use Amazon Cognito to store key-value pairs for large numbers of environment variables. Option C. Update the settings for the build project to use an Amazon S3 bucket for large numbers of environment variables. Option D. Use AWS Systems Manager parameter store to store large numbers of environment variables. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option D. Use AWS Systems Manager parameter store to store large numbers of environment variables. Question 30. A development team decides to adopt a continuous integration, continuous delivery (CI/CD) process using AWS Code Pipeline and AWS Code Commit for a new application. However, management wants a person to review and approve the code before it is deployed to production. How can the development team add a manual approver to the CI/CD pipeline? Option A. Use AWS SES to send an email to approvers when their action is required. Develop a simple application that allows approvers to accept or reject a build. Invoke an AWS Lambda function to advance the pipeline when a build is accepted. Option B. If approved, add an approved tag when pushing changes to the code commit repository. Code pipeline will proceed to build and deploy approved commits without interruption. Option C. Add an approval step to code commit. Commits will not be saved until approved. Option D. Add an approval action to the pipeline. Configure the approval action to publish to an Amazon SNS topic when approval is required. The pipeline execution will stop and wait for an approval. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option D. Add an approval action to the pipeline. Configure the approval action to publish to an Amazon SNS topic when approval is required. The pipeline execution will stop and wait for an approval. Question 31. A developer is migrating an on-premises application to AWS. The application currently takes user uploads and saves them to a local directory on the server. All uploads must be saved and made immediately available to all instances in an auto-scaling group. Which approach will meet these requirements? Option A. Use Amazon EBS and configure the application AMI to use a snapshot of the same EBS instance on boot. Option B. Use Amazon S3 and re-architect the application so all uploads are placed in S3. Option C. Use instance storage and share it between instances launched from the same Amazon machine image. AMI. Option D. Use Amazon EBS and file synchronization software to achieve eventual consistency among the auto-scaling group. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is Option D. Use Amazon EBS and file synchronization software to achieve eventual consistency among the auto-scaling group. Question 32. A developer is creating a script to automate the deployment process for a serverless application. The developer wants to use an existing AWS serverless application model. AWS SAM template for the application. What should the developer use for the project? Choose 2. Option A. Call AWS CloudFormation package to create the deployment package. Call AWS CloudFormation deploy to deploy the package afterward. Option B. Call SAM package to create the deployment package. Call SAM deploy to deploy the package afterward. Option C. Call AWS S3 CP to upload the AWS SAM template to Amazon S3. Call AWS Lambda update function code to create the application. Option D. Create a zip package locally and call AWS serverless repo create application to create a application. Option A. Create a zip package and upload it to Amazon S3. Call AWS CloudFormation create stack to create the application. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. Call AWS CloudFormation package to create the deployment package. Call AWS CloudFormation deploy to deploy the package afterward. Option B. Call SAM package to create the deployment package. Call SAM deploy to deploy the package afterward. Question 33. A developer has built a market application that stores pricing data in Amazon DynamoDB with Amazon Elastic Cache in front. The prices of items in the market change frequently. Sellers have begun complaining that, after they update the price of an item, the price does not actually change in the product listing. What could be causing this issue? Option A. The cache is not being invalidated when the price of the item is changed. Option B. The price of the item is being retrieved using a write-through Elastic Cache cluster. Option C. The DynamoDB table was provisioned with insufficient read capacity. Option D. The DynamoDB table was provisioned with insufficient write capacity. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. The cache is not being invalidated when the price of the item is changed. Question 34. The developer is creating a web application that collects highly regulated and confidential user data through a POST request. The web application is served through Amazon CloudFront. Usernames and phone numbers must be encrypted at the edge and must remain encrypted throughout the entire application stack. What is the most secure way to meet these requirements? Option A. Enforce Match Viewer with HTTPS only on CloudFront. Option B. Use only the newest TLS security policy on CloudFront. Option C. Enforce a signed URL on CloudFront on the front end. Option D. Use field-level encryption on CloudFront. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. Use field-level encryption on CloudFront. Question 35. A developer has been asked to create an AWS Lambda function that is triggered anytime updates are made to items in an Amazon DynamoDB table. The function has been created, and appropriate permissions have been added to the Lambda execution role. Amazon DynamoDB streams have been enabled for the table, but the function is still not being triggered. Which option would enable DynamoDB table updates to trigger the Lambda function? Option A. Change the stream view type parameter value to NEWANDOLDIMAGES for the DynamoDB table. Option B. Configure event source mapping for the Lambda function. Option C. Map an Amazon SNS topic to the DynamoDB streams. Option D. Increase the maximum execution time. Timeout. Setting of the Lambda function. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. Change the stream view type parameter value to NEWANDOLDIMAGES for the DynamoDB table. Question 36. A company maintains a REST service using Amazon API Gateway in the API Gateway native API key validation. The company recently launched a new registration page, which allows users to sign up for the service. The registration page creates a new API key using create API key and sends the new key to the user. When the user attempts to call the API using this key, the user receives a 403 forbidden error. Existing users are unaffected and can still call the API. What code updates will grant these new users access to the API? Option A. The create deployment method must be called so the API can be redeployed to include the newly created API key. Option B. The update authorizer method must be called to update the API's authorizer to include the newly created API key. Option C. The import API keys method must be called to import all newly created API keys into the current stage of API. Option D. The create usage plan key method must be called to associate the newly created API key with the correct usage plan. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. The create usage plan key method must be called to associate the newly created API key with the correct usage plan. Question 37. An application uploads photos to an Amazon S3 bucket. Each photo that is uploaded to the S3 bucket must be resized to a thumbnail image by the application. Each thumbnail image is uploaded with a new name in the same S3 bucket. Which AWS service can a developer configure to directly process each single S3 event for each S3 object? Upload. Option A. Amazon EC2. Option B. Amazon Elastic Container Service. Amazon ECS. Option C. AWS Elastic Beanstalk. Option D. AWS Lambda. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D, AWS Lambda. Question 38. A company is running a Docker application on Amazon ECS. The application must scale based on user load in the last 15 seconds. How should a developer instrument the code so that the requirement can be met? Option A. Create a high-resolution custom Amazon CloudWatch metric for user activity data. Then publish data every 30 seconds. Option B. Create a high-resolution custom Amazon CloudWatch metric for user activity data. Then publish data every 5 seconds. Option C. Create a standard resolution custom Amazon CloudWatch metric for user activity data. Then publish data every 30 seconds. Option D. Create a standard resolution custom Amazon CloudWatch metric for user activity data. Then publish data every 5 seconds. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Create a high-resolution custom Amazon CloudWatch metric for user activity data. Then publish data every 5 seconds. Question 39. Where should the app spec YML file be placed in order for AWS code deploy to work? Option A. In the root of the application source code directory structure. Option B. In the bin folder along with all the compiled code. Option C. In an S3 bucket. Option D. In the same folder as the application configuration files. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A, in the root of the application source code directory structure. Question 40. A developer is working on an application that handles 10 MB documents that contain highly sensitive data. The application will use AWS KMS to perform client-side encryption. What steps must be followed? Option A. Invoke the encrypt API passing the plaintext data that must be encrypted. Then reference the customer managed key ARN in the key ID parameter. Option B. Invoke the generate random API to get a data encryption key. Then use the data encryption key to encrypt the data. Option C. Invoke the generate data key API to retrieve the encrypted version of the data encryption key to encrypt the data. Option D. Invoke the generate data key API to retrieve the plaintext version of the data encryption key to encrypt the data. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. Invoke the generate data key API to retrieve the plaintext version of the data encryption key to encrypt the data.